The Zorvans were a race that the galaxy once feared. Known for their strength and fierce warriors, they had carved their place in the universe with an iron fist. But everything changed when a galactic war broke out. The Zorvans, caught in a struggle for power, made a disastrous decision that shattered their empire. Once proud and mighty, they were now seen as nothing more than dangerous outcasts, despised by almost every race in the galaxy. For years, the Zorvans had been left to fend for themselves on their dying planet, Zorva Prime. The once great cities now lay in ruins, and their people were scattered, living in hiding. The resources they once relied on were nearly exhausted, and the stars above them seemed to watch in silent judgment. Yet, in the midst of their despair, a message was sent out across the stars, a plea for help. It wasn't a call for war or revenge, but a desperate request for mercy. The Zorvans had lost everything, and they knew they could no longer survive alone. Their message was clear. They needed a lifeline. The universe, however, was not kind to those who were once feared and now forgotten. Many galaxies ignored the message, unwilling to risk their resources or political stability on a race that had brought so much destruction. The Zorvans were a symbol of failure, and no one wanted to extend a hand to them. But then came Earth, a young and relatively small player on the galactic stage. Humanity had barely made a mark in the vastness of space. They had their own struggles, their own troubles. Earth was still recovering from the scars of their past, and many believed that their focus should remain on their own survival, rather than involving themselves in alien conflicts. However, something about the Zorvans' message stirred a feeling of compassion in the hearts of some humans. It was not just the fear of what might happen if they didn't intervene, but the belief that humanity had something important to offer, a second chance. Earth had faced its own dark history, yet it had learned to rebuild, to stand strong again after setbacks. Maybe, just maybe, the humans could offer the same hope to the Zorvans. A meeting was called among Earth's leaders, and after much debate, a decision was made. The humans would respond to the call. They would send a group of volunteers to the far reaches of space to offer aid to a race that had been abandoned by everyone else. Captain Lydia Graves, a respected leader known for her sharp mind and unyielding determination, was chosen to lead the mission. Her crew consisted of a diverse group of humans, each with their own reasons for volunteering. Some were driven by a desire for adventure, others by the hope of proving humanity's worth, while a few simply believed in the power of kindness and the possibility of redemption. As the crew prepared for their journey, doubts lingered in the air. Was this a wise decision? Could humanity really make a difference for a race that the entire galaxy had turned its back on? No one had the answers, but they were about to find out. The journey to Zorva Prime would test their resolve, and perhaps it would test humanity's very soul. And so the Odyssey launched, heading into the unknown, carrying with it the hope of a forsaken race and the promise of a lifeline from the most unlikely of sources. The decision to help the Zorvans was not an easy one. Earth's leaders were divided. Some saw it as a chance to prove that humanity could rise above its own struggles and show the galaxy that Earth had the heart to help those in need. Others, however, were filled with doubt. The Zorvans had been a fierce race, feared across the galaxy. What if their enemies were right? What if the Zorvans could never be trusted? Captain Lydia Graves, chosen to lead the mission, sat in her quarters aboard the Odyssey, staring out at the stars. She knew the stakes. If the mission failed, Earth could be dragged into a war, or worse, humanity's name could be forever linked with a failed alien race. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the right thing to do. She had seen too many in her life who were abandoned, forgotten. She had seen what happens when the universe turns its back on someone. Humanity had been there too, facing their own dark days in history. She understood that pain, and that was why she was determined to give the Zorvans a chance. Her crew members, however, weren't as certain. Lieutenant Aiden Harper, her second-in-command, paced nervously in the ship's command center. He was a seasoned officer, cautious by nature. "Are we really doing the right thing?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. We're risking everything to help a race that the galaxy already wants nothing to do with. What if they turn on us when they're strong again? Lydia turned to face him, her eyes calm but firm. We don't know what will happen, Aiden. But we do know one thing. We have a chance to do what's right. If we don't try, we will never know what could have been. Aiden didn't respond, but his worried expression remained. He wasn't convinced, but he respected Lydia's leadership. She had always been the one to make the tough calls, and he trusted her, even if this mission made him uneasy. As the days passed, the Odyssey prepared for its journey. The crew began to feel the weight of their task, knowing that they were about to embark on an unprecedented mission to save a race that no one else cared about. The Zorvans were dangerous, yes, but they were also in desperate need of help. Lieutenant Mai Tanaka, the ship's engineer, had mixed feelings. We're going to a planet that's dying, and we don't even know if the Zorvans will accept our help, she said quietly to her colleague, Dr. Samuel Torres, the ship's medical officer. It's risky. What if we fail? Dr. Torres nodded, his face grim. If we do fail, we'll have to live with the consequences. But we have a responsibility. May. We have the knowledge and the resources. If we don't help, who will? Their words echoed through the ship. Each crew member had their doubts. But there was no turning back now. The Odyssey was already on its way to Zorva Prime, a journey that would take several weeks. They were about to meet a race on the edge of extinction, and in their hands lay the power to either save them or watch them vanish forever. Captain Graves gathered her crew for one last meeting before they reached Zorva Prime. She looked each of them in the eye and spoke simply. We are here because we believe in second chances. No matter the outcome, we'll do our best. That's all we can do. Her words carried weight. The crew knew that this was their moment to prove humanity's worth. Whether they succeeded or failed, they would show the galaxy that humanity was more than just a footnote in the story of the universe. It was a species capable of kindness, capable of doing what was right, even when the universe had turned its back on others. And with that, they set their course for the unknown. The Odyssey slowly slipped out of Earth's orbit, its engines roaring to life as the ship set course for the distant star system that held Zorva Prime. The crew, though uncertain and tense, was determined. The hum of the engines filled the ship, a steady rhythm that matched the pounding of each person's heart as they ventured into the unknown. Captain Lydia Graves stood at the helm, gazing out at the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed to stretch endlessly before her, and though the mission was fraught with risk, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were doing the right thing. She was leading the crew into a territory few humans had ever ventured into. Zorva Prime was a world that had been forgotten by most of the galaxy, its once thriving civilization now reduced to dust. Still, there was hope in her heart. She knew that sometimes the greatest risks led to the most extraordinary rewards. Lieutenant Aiden Harper walked up to her side, his face full of concern. Captain, I know we're all in this together, but I can't help but wonder if we're making a mistake. What if we're just making things worse? Lydia glanced at him and gave a small smile. You know, Aiden, I thought the same thing. But sometimes we have to take chances, even when the odds aren't in our favor. Aiden nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. I just wish we knew more. We don't even know if the Zorvans are going to welcome us. Lydia's voice softened. No one knows what the future holds, Aiden, but we're the first ones to try. That has to count for something. The journey to Zorva Prime would take weeks. Time on the ship was spent preparing for what might lie ahead. The crew trained, repaired their equipment, and prepared their supplies. They practiced survival drills, emergency protocols, and worked together to ensure that everything would run smoothly when they arrived. Yet, despite the constant work, the tension was palpable. Every crew member wondered, would the Zorvans even want their help? Would they trust humanity? In the crew lounge, Dr. Samuel Torres sat with Lieutenant Mai Tanaka, both trying to unwind after a long day of work. The conversation was quiet, but the weight of their mission hung in the air. I just keep thinking about what we're walking into, Mai said, her voice low. The Zorvans were fierce, and the galaxy has left them to die. What if we get there, and they don't even want us? Dr. Torres sighed. That's a possibility, but we can't predict everything. We have to be prepared for anything, and be ready to make the right call when the time comes. Mai looked down at her hands, tapping her fingers nervously. I don't know if I can just walk away if they refuse help. What if we fail? We won't fail, Torres replied firmly, though his own doubts lingered in his heart. We just have to try. Despite the doubts and fears, the crew pressed on. They were a team, each person with their own reasons for being there. Some had volunteered out of a sense of duty, others because they believed in the mission, and some simply because they felt that humanity had to make its mark in the universe, even if it meant offering help to those everyone else had forgotten. The journey felt long and lonely. The vast emptiness of space seemed to echo their uncertainty. But despite the doubts, there was a quiet sense of purpose that kept them going. As they neared Zorva Prime, the crew couldn't help but wonder, what would they find on this forsaken world? Would they be able to save the Zorvans, or would they fall short? The Odyssey was still a long way from Zorva Prime, but the crew's resolve was already beginning to harden. They weren't just traveling through space, they were traveling into history, and they couldn't afford to turn back now. After weeks of traveling through the vastness of space, the Odyssey finally approached its destination. Zorva Prime loomed before them, once a thriving planet, now a barren wasteland. From the window of the ship, the crew could see the signs of destruction. Crumbled cities, vast deserts, and the faint glow of dying energy sources scattered across the surface. The planet had been devastated, its resources nearly drained, and its people scattered, hiding in the shadows of their broken world. Captain Lydia Graves stood at the helm, her eyes narrowing as she observed the planet. She knew they were about to make history. Their mission had only just begun, but the weight of it all seemed to press down on her shoulders. The Zorvans were waiting for them, if they were still alive at all. We're entering the atmosphere, Aiden Harper called from his station. His voice was steady, but there was a trace of uncertainty in it. He too was struck by the sight of the ruined planet below. Prepare for landing, Lydia replied, trying to keep her tone firm. Everyone, stay sharp. This is uncharted territory. We don't know what to expect down there. The Odyssey descended through the thick atmosphere of Zorva Prime, the ship's hull groaning as it cut through the air. The crew watched through the windows as the land below grew larger and more distinct. The desolate terrain stretched out before them like a scared wasteland. The cities that once symbolized Zorvan strength were now nothing more than rubble, overrun by nature and time. There were no signs of life, no bustling crowds, no lights in the distance. The ship's engines roared as it touched down in a large open area that seemed relatively untouched by the destruction. The landing was smooth, but the crew couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that hung in the air. This was the Zorvans' home, a world that had once been full of life, now reduced to silence. As the crew disembarked, they were greeted by an eerie stillness. The temperature was harsh, the air dry and thick with dust. The land was marked by jagged cliffs and craters, remnants of the battles that had once been fought here. There were no signs of Zorvan life, no welcoming party, no sign that anyone had even noticed their arrival. We've landed, Lydia said, stepping down from the ship's ramp, her boots crunching against the dry ground. Keep your eyes open, everyone. We don't know what's out there. The crew spread out, scanning the surroundings with caution. The once proud alien race that had ruled this world was now scattered, and the humans were their last hope. But the question lingered. Would they want help? Would they trust humanity, a species they had never met before, a species that had no reason to be here other than to offer mercy? It was then that they heard it, the faint sound of footsteps. From behind a broken building, a figure appeared. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow, but as it stepped forward, the crew saw it clearly. A Zorvan. He was tall and broad, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to pierce through the very air. His clothing was torn, and his body showed signs of wear and tear from the hardships he had endured. He stared at them, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, no one moved. The humans stood still, unsure of what to do next. The Zorvan's eyes flickered from one face to another, and in that moment, the crew realized that this encounter could be the beginning of something far more complex than they had imagined. The Zorvan finally spoke, his voice rough but steady. "You came to help." Lydia stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, we're here to help. We know you've been abandoned, but we believe you deserve a second chance. We can rebuild together." The Zorvan didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at her, as if assessing whether or not to trust her words. Then, with a slow nod, he finally spoke again. "The universe turned its back on us. Why should you help?" Lydia met his gaze. "Because we know what it feels like to be abandoned, and we believe everyone deserves a chance to rebuild." The Zorvan said nothing more, but turned and motioned for the humans to follow him. The crew exchanged uncertain glances but followed. This was just the beginning of what would surely be a long and difficult journey. But for the first time, there was hope, a tiny spark in the midst of the desolation. The Zorvan led the crew deeper into the ruins of his city, his footsteps heavy on the cracked ground. Lydia Graves and her crew followed closely behind, their eyes scanning the destruction around them. The once thriving metropolis was now a ghost town, its towering buildings reduced to skeletal remains. Everywhere they looked, they saw the scars of war, broken walls, shattered windows, and overgrown plants pushing through the cracks in the pavement. Despite the desolation, there was an undeniable sense of history in the air. The Zorvans had once ruled this planet with power and pride, but now they were barely hanging on. The crew could see the deep sadness in their guide's eyes as he led them forward, the weight of his people's fall bearing down on him. The Zorvan stopped in front of a half-destroyed building, its entrance marked by a crumbling archway. He turned to face the humans, his gaze cold and unreadable. "Here," he said, gesturing for them to enter. "This is where we hide. We are not welcome anywhere else. You are the first outsiders to come here in years." Lydia nodded, her heart heavy. She had known that the Zorvans had been abandoned, but standing in the heart of their crumbling world made the truth even harder to bear. The humans had come to offer a lifeline, but the question remained, would the Zorvans accept it? Inside the building, the crew found a group of Zorvans huddled together. They were tired and thin, their clothes ragged and worn. The room was dimly lit, with only a few flickering lights hanging from the ceiling. It was a far cry from the glorious cities they had once known. The humans set to work immediately, offering what little help they could. Mai Tanaka and Dr. Samuel Torres began setting up medical supplies, while Aiden Harper worked with the Zorvans to assess their energy resources. Lydia, meanwhile, stood by, watching the interactions carefully. The atmosphere was tense. The Zorvans were wary, and the humans, though eager to help, were unsure of how to proceed. One of the Zorvans, a woman with silver-gray hair and a scar running across her cheek, approached Lydia. She was older than the others, her eyes filled with a deep sadness that spoke of a lifetime of loss. "You are the leader," the woman said, her voice low and cautious. "You offer us help, but you do not know what it means to live like this. We are broken. We have nothing left to offer. Why do you waste your time on us?" Lydia met the woman's gaze, her voice steady. "Because we've all been through hard times. We know what it's like to feel alone. But that doesn't mean we give up. You may be broken, but that doesn't mean you can't rebuild. And we want to help you do that." The Zorvan woman looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing Lydia's words. Finally, she sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. "And if we cannot rebuild, what then?" Lydia paused, her mind racing. She had thought long and hard about this moment. She knew the risks, the challenges that lay ahead, but she also knew that the humans had something that could make a difference: hope. She took a step forward, her voice unwavering. "Then we will fight together," she said, "because sometimes rebuilding isn't just about resources. It's about finding the strength to keep going, no matter what." The room fell silent. For the first time since their arrival, the Zorvans seemed to consider the possibility of hope. The woman with the scar nodded slowly, her expression softening. "You are brave," she said quietly. Maybe we can try." And just like that, an unexpected alliance was born. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. The humans had offered a lifeline to a forsaken race, and the Zorvans, for the first time in years, had accepted. Together, they would begin the long road to rebuilding, not just a planet, but a people. As the days passed on Zorva Prime, the alliance between the humans and the Zorvans began to take shape. The Odyssey crew worked tirelessly alongside their new allies, setting up medical tents, repairing energy grids, and offering technology that could help the Zorvans survive. But even as the crew gave their all, something didn't feel right to Captain Lydia Graves. She had expected to encounter hardship. She had expected the Zorvans to be distrustful and wary of the humans, but she hadn't anticipated the weight of the secrecy surrounding their past. Every conversation with the Zorvans seemed to have a layer of unspoken truth. Whenever they spoke of their past, of the war that had destroyed their empire, they did so with an odd sense of distance, as if they were reluctant to remember the full extent of their failure. One evening, as Lydia walked through the makeshift camp, she noticed a small group of Zorvans huddled around a fire, speaking in hushed voices. She approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude, but curiosity got the better of her. She lingered just out of sight, trying to make out their words. "I told them," one of the Zorvans was saying, his voice low and urgent. "The humans cannot know the truth. Not yet. If they find out, they will leave." "I know," replied a woman, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if we don't tell them soon, they will discover it themselves. We can't keep hiding forever." Lydia's heart skipped a beat. What were they hiding? The war, the fall of their empire. She had assumed that was their darkest secret. But there was something more, something that had them so terrified of the humans finding out. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, making her presence known. The Zorvans immediately fell silent, their eyes darting to her in alarm. "Captain Graves," the man spoke first, his voice steady but tense. "We didn't expect you." Lydia smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't mean to overhear, but I can't help but wonder what you're all so afraid of." The woman with the scar, whom Lydia had spoken to earlier, rose from her seat and approached. "We have told you the story of the war, Captain," she said, her tone grave. "But there is more. Much more. Things we cannot share lightly." Lydia didn't move, but her gaze was intense. "I've seen what the war did to your cities. I've heard the rumors, the whispers from other races. But there's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me." The woman lowered her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "You're right. The Zorvans weren't just manipulated by others. We were deceived. By someone we trusted." Lydia's heart raced. This was more than just a tale of military failure. This was something deeper, something that had been kept hidden for a reason. "Who deceived you?" The Zorvan woman hesitated, looking over her shoulder before answering. "The Kalfar. They are a powerful race, and they used us as pawns in their war against the other galactic powers. We fought their battles for them, believing that we were fighting for our own survival. But in truth, they manipulated us into becoming the monsters the galaxy now fears." Lydia was silent for a moment, trying to process what she had just heard. The Kalfar, an alien species she had only heard of in passing. She had assumed they were just another race vying for power, but this was something far more complex. So Lydia said slowly, her voice measured, "The war, the destruction, the betrayal, it wasn't entirely your fault." The Zorvan woman nodded, a sad look crossing her face. "No, we were deceived, used, and abandoned by the very people we thought were our allies. And now we are left with nothing but the scars of our mistakes. Lydia stepped forward, placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. That's not your fault. You were victims, just like anyone else. The Zorvans were silent for a long time, and Lydia could feel the weight of their pain. They had been deceived, manipulated into a war they didn't fully understand, and now they were trying to rebuild from the ashes of their own mistakes. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about redemption. Lydia understood now. The Zorvans didn't just need help rebuilding their cities. They needed help rebuilding their honor, their trust. They needed humanity's compassion, not just for survival, but for healing. And that was something she was willing to offer. Then we'll help you rebuild, Lydia said, her voice resolute. But we can't do it alone. We'll need to work together and trust each other. The Zorvans looked at her, and for the first time in many years, there was a flicker of hope in their eyes. The days that followed the revelation of the Zorvans' past were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Captain Lydia Graves and her crew worked even harder alongside their Zorvan allies, putting their differences aside in order to rebuild what was lost. The human technology they'd brought with them was helping, and the Zorvans were slowly regaining the strength they once had. But the peaceful days of cooperation were short-lived. One morning, as the crew worked to restore energy to a vital Zorvan facility, the sensors aboard the Odyssey began to beep urgently. The ship's communications officer, Lieutenant Aiden Harper, stood frozen at his station, staring at the screen in disbelief. "Captain, you need to see this," Aiden called, his voice tense. Lydia quickly made her way to the command center, where Aiden showed her the screen. It was a distress signal, a warning broadcast from a fleet of ships coming out of deep space. The ships were large, their designs menacing and unmistakable. The Kalthar, an ancient and powerful alien race that had once manipulated the Zorvans into war, had returned. "They're here," Aiden said, his face pale. "They found us." Lydia's heart sank. She had known this moment might come, but seeing it now, so real and close, felt like a punch to the gut. The Kalthar had been the ones to deceive the Zorvans, pushing them into a devastating war that had almost wiped out their race. And now, they had returned, likely to finish what they started. "We have to warn the Zorvans," Lydia said, her mind racing. "We have to prepare them." Aiden nodded, already sending out a warning to the Zorvans' leaders. The message was clear. The Kalthar were coming, and they would not stop until they had destroyed everything in their path. As the warning spread, the Zorvans responded swiftly. They had learned much from their past mistakes, and they were ready to defend their home. But there was something different in their approach now, a sense of unity with the humans that hadn't existed before. Captain Graves met with General Crix, the Zorvan leader who had first greeted them upon their arrival. He was a large figure, his muscles still strong despite the years of hardship. His once proud eyes, though burdened by regret, now shone with determination. "We are not the same people we once were," General Crix said, his voice steady. "We were deceived, and we will not be used again. We will fight with you, Captain Graves. Together, we can defeat them." Lydia nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had never expected the Zorvans to trust humanity this much, but in these desperate times, there was no room for hesitation. If they were to survive, they had to stand united. The Odyssey's crew and the Zorvans began preparing for battle. They knew the Kalthar would not hesitate to strike first, and they needed every advantage they could get. The humans shared their advanced tactics and weapons systems with the Zorvans, while the Zorvans showed them how to use the planet's terrain to their advantage. As the hours passed, the tension grew. Lydia stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, staring out at the approaching fleet of Kalthar ships. They were powerful, but the humans and the Zorvans had a strength the Kalthar couldn't anticipate: unity, determination, and the will to protect each other. The sound of engines filling the air outside was a constant reminder of the impending danger. The Kalthar were almost here. "We're ready," Aiden said, his voice calm despite the weight of the situation. Lydia looked around at her crew, and then at the Zorvans standing beside them. They were no longer strangers, they were allies, fighting for a common cause. "We are ready," Lydia replied, her voice filled with unwavering confidence. "Let's show the Calthar that they cannot break us." The battle for Zorva Prime was about to begin, and Lydia knew one thing for certain. They would fight together, and they would not lose without a fight. The fate of the Zorvans, and the hope of a new beginning, depended on it. The silence was deafening as Lydia Graves and her crew stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, watching the Calthar fleet grow closer with every passing second. The vastness of space seemed to stretch endlessly before them, but the threat of destruction loomed like a storm on the horizon. The Zorvans, once feared and now fighting for their survival, were preparing alongside the humans for the battle that would determine the future of Zorva Prime. Lydia's eyes never left the view screen. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for redemption, for proving that the Zorvans deserved a second chance. "We're running out of time," Aiden Harper said, his voice tense as he monitored the Calthar's advance. "They'll be in firing range in less than 10 minutes. Lydia nodded, her mind working quickly. "Prepare the weapons. I want all fighters prepped and ready to launch. This is going to be a battle for everything we've worked for." The crew moved swiftly, each person focused on their task. In the hangar bay, the Zorvans were preparing their own ships, learning from the humans on how to integrate the new technology into their arsenal. Despite their war-torn past, the Zorvans were fierce fighters, and now, with humanity's help, they had a chance to stand against the Calthar. General Crakes stood beside Lydia on the bridge, his expression grim. "We owe the Calthar nothing," he said, his voice low and filled with bitterness. "They used us, manipulated us into fighting their war. Now, they'll pay for what they've done." Lydia turned to him, her gaze steady. "We don't fight out of hate, General. We fight to protect what's ours. Zorva Prime, your people, and the future we're trying to build together. That's why we'll win." The Calthar ships finally came into view, their sleek, menacing forms a stark contrast to the worn-out Zorvan ships. Lydia's stomach tightened. These were not just ships, they were weapons of destruction, carrying the weight of an empire that had no mercy. "Here they come," Aiden said, his voice tight. "Firing range in 5 seconds. Lydia's voice rang out, calm but firm. "All hands, prepare for battle. This is our fight now. Let's show the Calthar they picked the wrong people to underestimate." The Odyssey and the Zorvan fleet moved into position, and the battle erupted in a fury of energy blasts and gunfire. The Calthar fired first, their weapons tearing into the Zorvan ships, sending them spiraling out of control. But the humans and the Zorvans fought back with everything they had. Lydia barked orders as her crew fired back, dodging blasts and maneuvering the ship with expert precision. Target their engines. Disable their ability to pursue. The Odyssey unleashed a barrage of missiles, hitting the Calthar flagship with pinpoint accuracy. The Calthar retaliated with a fierce attack, but the humans and Zorvans were ready. Zorvan fighters swarmed the Calthar ships, their weapons cutting through the enemy lines with deadly force. The humans provided support, using their advanced technology to shield the Zorvan ships from the worst of the enemy's fire. In the midst of the chaos, Lydia's thoughts raced. This wasn't just about victory. It was about survival, about proving to the universe that even the most despised races could rise up and defend what was theirs. For every Zorvan ship that fell, another human or Zorvan fighter appeared to take its place. The battle raged on, but the Calthar began to falter. Their fleet, once so confident, was now struggling against the relentless teamwork of the humans and Zorvans. As the Calthar flagship fired a final devastating blast toward the Odyssey, Lydia watched in horror as one of the Zorvan ships tried to shield them, taking the hit instead. The ship exploded in a burst of light, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. "No," Lydia shouted, her heart sinking as she saw the explosion. But the crew pushed forward, fueled by the sacrifice of their fallen comrades. The final blow came when the Odyssey locked onto the Calfar flagship's core and delivered a precise strike, crippling their command ship. With a massive explosion, the Calfar flagship broke apart, signaling the end of the battle. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged breathing of the crew. The battle was over. The Calfar had been defeated, their fleet scattered. Zorva Prime and the Zorvans had survived. Lydia looked around at her crew and their Zorvan allies. The price of victory had been high, but it had been worth it. Together, they had shown the universe that even the most despised race could rise above its past and fight for a new future. The battle had been long and brutal, but the victory was undeniable. Zorva Prime had been saved, and with it, the chance for a new beginning. The Calfar were defeated, their fleet scattered across the void of space. The humans and Zorvans stood together, looking out at the wreckage of their enemies, knowing that they had fought not just for survival, but for something much more important: redemption. Captain Lydia Graves stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, staring at the swirling debris left in the wake of the battle. The Zorvan fleet had taken heavy losses, but they had fought fiercely, showing the universe that they were not the monsters they had once been made out to be. The humans, too, had proven that they were willing to stand by their new allies, no matter the cost. As the Odyssey began to make its way back toward Zorva Prime, Lydia felt a sense of relief, but it was tinged with the sadness of the lives lost. She glanced at Aiden Harper, who was sitting quietly at his station, his face drawn from the battle. "We did it," Lydia said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. But it wasn't easy. Aiden looked up, his expression weary but proud. "No, it wasn't. But we did it together. And that's what matters." Lydia nodded. She had seen so much destruction in her life, but this was different. The battle had been about more than just survival. It had been about giving a broken people a chance to rebuild. The Zorvans had been manipulated, used, and abandoned by the galaxy. But now, they had a future. They had hope. As the Odyssey landed back on Zorva Prime, the crew disembarked, greeted by the Zorvan survivors. There was no grand celebration, no loud cheers. Instead, there was a quiet sense of relief, a shared understanding that the hard work was only just beginning. General Crix approached Lydia, his expression grave but grateful. "We owe you our lives, Captain Graves. Without your help, we would have been wiped out." Lydia shook her head, her voice firm. "No, you fought for your survival, just as much as we did. We helped each other. That's what makes us stronger." Crix nodded, his eyes filled with a new respect for humanity. "You're right. And now we have a chance to rebuild. Together." Lydia glanced around at the people of Zorva Prime. Zorvans who had once been rulers of a mighty empire, now standing side by side with humans who had once been strangers. The bond between them was not just one of survival. It was one of mutual respect, of shared experiences. The work of rebuilding would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But Lydia knew that together, the humans and the Zorvans could face anything. The universe might have turned its back on the Zorvans, but humanity had shown them that there was still kindness in the galaxy, still hope for a new beginning. As the sun set over the barren landscape of Zorva Prime, the crew of the Odyssey stood together with their Zorvan allies, looking out at the horizon. There was no telling what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of peace. Lydia felt the weight of the past lifting, and with it, a new sense of purpose. This was just the beginning of a new chapter for the Zorvans, for humanity, and for the galaxy itself. Together, they would write that story, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The weeks following the battle had been filled with progress and hard work. Zorva Prime was slowly being rebuilt, its shattered cities beginning to take shape once more. The humans and Zorvans worked side by side, using their combined resources and knowledge to restore the planet. The Zorvans, once feared and despised by the galaxy, were now seeing the possibility of a new future, a future where they could rebuild their lives, their society, and their honor. Captain Lydia Graves stood on a high platform overlooking the newly constructed Zorvan city center. The view was not what it once had been. There were no towering spires or grand monuments, but it was a symbol of something new. The streets were filled with people, both human and Zorvan, working together, sharing laughter, and offering assistance. It was a sight Lydia would never forget, a sight that reminded her of the journey they had taken and the lives they had saved. Aiden Harper joined her, his face tired but full of pride. "I never thought I'd see this," he said, his voice quiet. "Not after everything they've been through." Lydia smiled, her eyes still on the bustling city below. "It's amazing what people can do when they have the chance, when they have hope." Aiden nodded, looking at her with newfound respect. "You really believed in them, didn't you? Even when we were all so unsure." Lydia's gaze softened. "I believed in humanity, Aiden. I believed that we could do something good. I believe that even the most despised races have the chance for a second chance. We've all been through hard times, but we can rise above them. That's what matters." Their conversation was interrupted as General Crix approached them. His appearance was less grim now, his once battered armor shining in the sunlight. There was a new strength in his stride, a confidence that hadn't been there before. The Zorvans had not only survived, they were rebuilding, and with each passing day, they grew stronger. "Captain Graves," Crix said, nodding toward her, "I wanted to thank you, once again. If it weren't for your people, we would have never had the chance to rebuild." Lydia turned to him, her expression warm but firm. "We did it together, General. It's not just about saving a planet. It's about saving a people. You've done the hard part by deciding to change, by choosing redemption. Now you're showing the galaxy that change is possible." Crix bowed his head, acknowledging her words. "And we won't forget that, Captain. Our future now is tied to yours. Humanity has shown us that mercy still exists in this universe." The two stood in silence for a moment, watching the activity below. The sounds of construction and conversations filled the air, proof of the progress they had made. But there was still much work ahead. The Zorvans, though hopeful, had lost much, and the road to full recovery would take time. Lydia knew this, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. The mission had been difficult, filled with risks and uncertainty. But the rewards, seeing a people rise from the ashes, seeing humanity prove its worth, were beyond what she had imagined. She turned to General Crix, her voice strong. "This is just the beginning. The galaxy is watching, and we've shown them that redemption is possible. We've shown them that humanity is not just a footnote in the story of the universe. We are a part of it." Crix smiled, his expression genuine. "We've seen that, Captain, and we'll make sure the galaxy sees it too." Lydia looked out over the horizon, her heart swelling with pride. The journey had been long, and the challenges were far from over. But humanity had proven its worth, and together, with the Zorvans by their side, they had forged a new future, a future built on trust, unity, and the belief that no one was beyond redemption. As the sun set over Zorva Prime, Lydia Graves knew that this was a legacy worth leaving behind. And no matter what the future held, it would be a future they would face together.